Hello, this is Miss McCahan, and we're going to review what we learned about lines and angles. Remember that we have parallel lines, and if we want to show they're parallel, they have these arrows on those lines that are parallel, and we show that they're parallel, R is parallel to S by using this symbol, and it looks like a large 11. Also, we have perpendicular lines, and notice that we have a box here showing they're perpendicular, and we use the upside down T to say R is perpendicular to S. The new word that you're probably not used to is skew lines. So remember that skew lines means that they're not parallel, but they also don't cross. So notice that line C here is going through the plane here, but line B is laying on the plane. So these lines will never cross, they will never intersect, but notice that they're also not parallel. That's what we mean by skew lines. Another way I like to think of it is using a box. So if I had a box and I was looking at line AD, this line right here, then if I wanted to pick a line that was skewed to that line, I would pick a line that's not parallel and also a line that would never intersect it, like FE. So that's what we mean by skew. And also a new word that we learned is transversal. Remember, a transversal is simply a line that crosses two other lines. And when that happens, we create 4 different angles going on here. So let's review the angles that we do know from previous units. Remember that we know what linear pairs are. Those would be like angles 1 and 2, 3 and 4, or like 6 and 8, 5 and 7. And we also know that vertical angles, what those look like. That would be like angles 2 and 3, 1 and 4, or 6 and 7, and 5 and 8. Now the new angles that we learned about, one of them was called corresponding angles. Corresponding angles would be like 2 and 6, or 1 and 5. Notice that we call them corresponding because they are in the same corresponding position. So 2 and 6 are to the right-hand side of that transversal, and they're also above each of their lines. And then, for example, like 3 and 7 are corresponding. Notice they're both on the left-hand side of that transversal, and they are also below their corresponding lines. We also have angles that are called alternate interior angles. That would be like 4 and 5 or 3 and 6. Notice that they're on opposite sides of that transversal, and they're on the inside of their lines. Alternate exterior angles, same idea. They're alternate because they're on opposite sides of the transversal. So like 1 and 8 are on opposite sides of the transversal, but they're on the outside or the exterior of these lines going across. So 1 and 8 would be alternate exterior, and 2 and 7. And then the last kind that we have is called same side interior angles, or also some books call them consecutive interior angles. So those would be just how it sounds, same side interior, so they're on the same side of the transversal. 4 and 6 are on the same side, and they're on the interior of these two lines. So 4 and 6 would be same side interior, and 3 and 5 would be same side interior. Now, these lines are not parallel. Notice that they are not marked with those arrows, but if these were parallel, if I had somehow showed you that, we know that these lines are parallel to each other, then we know something about these special angles. So all of these angles, the new angles that we talked about, those would be the corresponding, the alternate interior and the alternate exterior, all of those would be congruent to each other, just like vertical angles are congruent. And then if these were parallel, if these lines were parallel, then we would know that same side interior angles are supplementary. Okay, they're not, so 4 and 6 would be supplementary, not congruent, but supplementary, just like linear pairs are supplementary. So let's just describe these relationships. So 1 and 2, if we had to figure out what type of angles they were, I would notice that these are on opposite sides of that transversal. Here's my transversal. And then they're on the interior of these two lines. So those would be called alternate interior angles. In this diagram, here's my transversal. Notice that 3 and 4 are on opposite sides and that they're on the exterior. So those would be called alternate exterior angles. And then 5 and 6, here's my transversal that cuts through both of those lines. 5 and 6 are on the same side of that transversal, and they're on the insides of these two lines, so we would call those same side interior angles. Now, if we knew that any of these lines were parallel, if we knew these two lines were parallel, alternate interior angles would be congruent. If we knew that these were parallel, even though they don't look like it at all, but if they were, then those would be congruent. And then if we knew these two lines were parallel, which again they don't look at and they didn't tell us, but if they were, the same side interior angles would be supplementary. Okay, so here's another example that you can try. And stop the video and see if you can do these on your own before I go through it. So 2 and 7, those would be alternate exterior angles. 3 and 5, those would be next. 3 and 5 would be same side interior angles. 1 and 5, those would be corresponding angles. 4 and 5, those would be alternate interior angles. 4 and 8, those would also be corresponding angles, so that would be used again for number 5. And then 4 and 6, those would be same side interior angles again. So if I was trying to solve for x here, I would use the fact that now I know these two lines are parallel. You see those two arrows. So then I know that I can conclude that either my angles are going to be congruent or supplementary. So I just need to figure out what kind these are. This angle right here is corresponding to this one right here. So if I wanted to write an equation, I would know that 125 is equal to x plus 15. And then to solve for x, I would simply subtract 15. So if you do that, you'll get that we have x equals 110. Okay. So we would do the same thing here. These, I would first figure out what types of angles these are. These lines they told us are parallel. So these are alternate interior angles, and I would do the same thing as I did before. I would say alternate interior angles, those are congruent. So I know that 120 would be equal to x plus 35. And then I would simply solve for x by subtracting 35 from each side. And then that would give me x equals 85.